Oh. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. If you're based in the US, I really appreciate you joining the day after Thanksgiving. I imagine that must be you must be so tired. If you're like us in this household, you're tired. Thanks so much for coming in. Welcome to my closet. Today we're talking about change, and I'm going to share a story. We're going to talk about how change, whenever you want to change something, how that honestly starts with you and how I have really learned that the hard way, to be totally honest. Thanks so much for joining. I appreciate you coming in. Hi, everyone in TikTok and YouTube land. If you're based in the US, thanks so much for joining the day after Thanksgiving. I'm going to start off today talking a little bit about change, how incredibly difficult that journey has been for me. Um, and honestly, starting off, I think change probably really happened in a much more expedited way just because it felt like I literally had no choice but to do so. Um, I think it really started in 2024 and it really um I had to get really dialed into what I was feeling and what I was experiencing. And it ultimately culminated in the founding and launching of Courage Class. So I'm the creator and host of Courage Class. It's a podcast. I think of it as scaled mentorship, and it's specifically aimed at the Asian American community. And I talk about health and wellness, or I don't talk about it. I actually interview experts from the community on how to reclaim health and wellness and success, um, big topics that I feel as though, at least in my community, we've been explicitly taught to think about these topics in a very specific way, that haven't, at least in my case, always been healthy. And so in 2024, I really experienced a sort of unraveling, if you will, of sorts, and an unraveling in the sense that I just realized I did not, life in the way that I had structured it was not working for me. And I was really struggling in so many different areas. And it really came to a time and a place where I had to take ownership of that. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. So thanks so much for joining, for jumping in on um, this live chat. Thanks for joining me from my closet the day after Thanksgiving. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming in, you guys. This is my first time going live. I've been live on TikTok before, but my first time going live on YouTube. So uh, it's a very similar experience, feels like. Um, but I'll go ahead and get started in another minute. I'll just wait for folks to come in. Thanks so much for joining. If you're based in the US, we just had a huge holiday, Thanksgiving, yesterday. Although arguably, I don't know if we should consider it a holiday per se. Um, and I know that it is a time for many families to gather. And if you didn't gather with your family, not a big deal. I hope you still had a wonderful evening, and that you found in your own way how to make it special for yourself. So thanks so much for joining the day after Thanksgiving. I'm going to take um, some time to just introduce the topic and introduce who I am. If you're just joining, my name's Lindsay, and I am Hi TikTok and YouTube. I'm the founder and creator of a podcast and platform called Courage Class. I think of Courage Class as scaled mentorship, and it's specifically aimed at the Asian American community. And I interview experts and trailblazers from the community on um, topics like health and wellness, and success. And the mission is really to help the community. If you believe that you need this, reclaim some of those topics because we've been told a lot of stories in general. The Asian community, Asian American communities, obviously, we are not a monolith. And there are similarities across our community, similarities in terms of values. And so I offer the opportunity to rethink some of the stories that we've been collectively told about ourselves. Um, we're in we're launching season 2 in January, and I'm super excited about, s all of the guests, not some of the guests, but all of the guests, and deeply, deeply honored that, my guests would even consider spending an hour with me talking about some of these topics. Today we're talking about change and how that change starts with you, and the moment that I really had to take ownership of where I was, in my life, in my relationships, in my personal and my professional life, if you will. And I've always um, prided myself on being someone who really tried to do her best. And, I'm the oldest of four, and uh, very much took on the responsibility of being the oldest of four. I have three little brothers, in a very serious way. Responsible for everybody's feelings, responsible for kind of knowing what everybody's needs were, and making that happen. So, yes, of course, I'm the one that hosted Thanksgiving, and I will host Christmas too. I know. Um, what am I thinking? It's sort of this conflicting narrative in my head. To what extent is it my responsibility? It's not my responsibility, is what I've learned. And I also, love and enjoy seeing my family, for all the imperfect aspects, um, and ways in which we sometimes interact with one another. I still really value the time that I have with family. So okay, I'm getting off track. So oldest of four, very responsible, always, worked hard in school, worked hard in my job, worked hard in my marriage. I really believed and bought into this narrative that I had to somehow be and do everything. With my husband, I had a very traditional marriage. He went out and he was the breadwinner, if you will. I took care of the house and I had a career, um, which is and no help, which is if you are like me, at least for me, completely unsustainable. It was exhausting. We have 3 young kids as well, and trying to keep that up, was so extraordinarily difficult. But I never stopped to think about how extraordinarily difficult it was. I just would beat myself up, and I would beat myself up to the point of like, "Lindsay, why can't you do this? Why can't you seamlessly manage um, and do, in the way that you're supposed to, in the way that you saw your grandmother and your mother, growing up, and all of the narratives that you've consumed over, your lifetime that said that you are supposed to be successful and seamless at being both a caregiver and a professional." And man, I'm 45 years old, and I did not know that that was just a narrative up until maybe a couple years ago. and arguably, I would say up until, last year. Um, and I didn't take ownership for just sort of the challenges that I was experiencing both personally and professionally. It was like everybody else's problem except for mine. And so I got to a point where I just couldn't operate and function in that way anymore. And sort of had like a crash and burn moment, if you will. Things were totally unraveling and was on the verge of, breaking up with my husband. uh, just was really lost sort of professionally. And I said, I need to take a pause and I really need to think about um, what I want and how I want my life to look like. Now, look, it's not possible for everyone to just take a pause. Like I say that knowing that um, sometimes you really sorry, my son is screaming 6, 7 in the background. It's distracting. Sometimes that pause, I know for many people can look very different. It can mean like having to continue to work in the same job and taking like your 10-minute breaks to sort of dream and think about something, a life that might be different and ways in which you can change. It could be literally people taking, a 2-week vacation and to think and to clear their headspace. Um, I don't think it matters, what it looks like. It's just that you're doing it. And the thing is, I was not doing it. I didn't even know that rest was a possibility in my life. I was just sort of, like unconsciously going through and like trying to get through it and slogging through it and being so deeply resentful for what I was experiencing. And I didn't until I literally stopped and paused work, I didn't even realize how exhausted I was and how um in in total shambles. Um Things were both, you know, personally in particular with my husband. Um and how I just was accepting of the exhaustion and the burnout. And I realized that, it's no one else's responsibility except for my own. Now that took, I say that like that is something that just like happened overnight. And that is definitely not something that just happened. Like that was a lot of therapy, a lot of listening to podcasts, a lot of surrounding myself with, frankly, speakers like podcasts that, I think of like Oprah, right? Like just like you can do it. I believe in you. Sort of that type of energy that I surrounded myself when it came to podcasting or my podcast and the books that I would read. I really was so intentional about surrounding myself with voices that ordered me. And it had to be in order because at that point, still at the very beginning of like this process, I was not taking ownership of it. And so it really had to be um, just me sort of consuming this information, um, hearing Mel Robbins order me that, change is possible, even when I didn't believe it. And so I think, as a side note, I think that's why podcasts to me are so important because they can be such a source of grounding, if you don't have that anywhere else in your life. Um, and and so yeah, just really slowly starting that process of taking ownership of um, where things, were, and how bad they were, and saying, what is my role in changing this, as opposed to before, just sort of unconsciously going through. So I'm just going to take a pause here. And I see a couple people have joined. Thanks so much. I see Donald and Skyfruit, Jocelyn Moore. I really appreciate you taking time, especially if you're based in the US. We just had big holiday. Although arguably, I don't know if it's responsible to call it a holiday. And I know that it's a time where a lot of families gather. So if you had that big meal, and if you didn't have that big meal, because many people don't have that big meal. So I just really appreciate you joining me on a Friday morning. I hope that work is allowing you some time off during this period. Um, so I want to go back to talking about change. Um, so really taking ownership of that change. Um, Being forced to take ownership. I'm gonna be really honest. Like, I was somebody who, if you would have allowed me to continue living that way, um, like, it wasn't, like, so bad, it was just kind of bad, I think I probably would've kept doing it because there would have been no impetus for change. There would have been no reason for doing that. It had to be like, I'm just that type of person. It has to be, like, so bad. It has to be so exhausting. It has to literally hit me like a club over the head for me to really, um, lock in and say, "Oh, like, something is not good here." You know? And that is exactly what happened in 2024. It was so exhausting. I was so burnt out. I don't think I had it in me anymore to really stop and change. And it was really that level of, I know this isn't a word, that level of terribleness that really compelled me to, um, to really start exploring. And the exploration, it did start off with, there was therapy, there was a lot of like writing in a journal, but honestly, like it was the podcast voices that I had decided to surround myself with that really would speak to me and tell me that one, change is possible, and that two, I was capable of that change. I think that this is why I'm so drawn to podcasts. At least for my very introverted personality, it's a very comfortable way to consume information. Maybe, I think I felt a little embarrassed, especially at the beginning of my process, that, oh, I need this type of support. Like there was this voice in my head that really believed that I didn't need it, that it was shameful to like ask for help. And that was definitely a narrative that I quickly undid when when things were just exhausting and, sort of not going um, in a way that I had imagined, and take a quick sip of coffee. Um, I don't know where you guys are. It's 9 o'clock where I am, or 9:20 rather. And I tend to drink coffee all morning long. Um, so um, where was I? Oh, so podcasting. Yeah, podcasting. When people say surround yourself with um, a team of people who really believe in you, um, and who are going to just cheerlead like constantly, persistently. Um, I had uh, family and friends um, who, of course, if I called them up and I said, "Hey, I need this right now," would stop and listen. And I think I just needed more. I needed people constantly in my ear to yell at me, to encourage me, to um, really demand of me that one, change is possible, and change is it's not only possible, but it's that I was capable of that, because I didn't really believe that. I thought that I was stuck in this pattern. I thought that I was stuck in this life that I had constructed for myself, that I built, and was just like way in over my head in terms of, um, I had work, and I was managing pretty much everything at home, and my partner traveled like what felt like constantly. He traveled intensely for his job, and so there's a lot of resentment that builds from that for me. Um, because if you've ever been on a work trip, the idea of having room service ordered to your room, and the company paying for it is something that I thoroughly enjoy. So, And you get to sleep and wake up and have quiet coffee if you don't have kids. So, it was not a healthy situation, and I didn't, my partner and I, we didn't communicate. We don't have, my parents weren't great about communicating with one another. There were never anything like, sometimes I hear about families having like team meetings or family meetings. I mean, we didn't have anything like that, and neither did my partner. And so, this notion of two people communicating around their goals and their aspirations and what they want for their family, like that was a completely foreign subject. We weren't operating from a shared set of values. Um, and he wanted one thing, I wanted another thing. And so it was just a recipe for disaster. And there's a such a provocative tendency, right? Or provocative opportunity to like blame everything um on anything else except for yourself. At least there was for me. And I think that the moment I really took ownership of, wait a minute, like I created this and I'm the one who's choosing. And that word choice was such a critically important choice because it gave me this lens of, wait a minute, so I can do it or I don't have to do it. And like just having that, I feel like was so revolutionary for me because up until a certain point, up until last year, I didn't think I had a choice. I was like, this is the way life is. Like, this fucking sucks, and like this is like the way we're gonna operate for the next like whatever how many years we have, decades left of working. Oh my God, decades left of working. Um, this is like what it's gonna feel like. And I was like, I got to a point where I was like, unsubscribe. And I am going to be so intentional about changing what that feels like. Um, but again, that took me a really long time. God, change is so hard, you guys. Like, I don't know about you if you've ever, set out to try and do something different. Now, again, from my perspective, that was excruciatingly difficult because I never thought that there was, one thing I'm bird walking right now, but one thing I really admire about Gen Z and Gen Alpha is I think they really hold the older generation. So I'm Gen X. I think they really hold us accountable to like, what's the point of all of this? And they're so amazing about saying, here are the alternative ways to like pursue whatever, to live your life. And I really admire that about that generation or about those generations rather. And so I think that up until last year, I thought there was only one way to like live your life. And that's, it's basically based on the narratives that are handed to you, that are like force fed to you growing up. Um, anything from, and it's all like passive consumption, right? These narratives. I feel like what you see in commercials and who you see on TV and what you see in media and what voices you hear, what voices you're introduced to in school. It's all a big freaking sham. And I didn't realize that until, 45, until literally last year, that, oh, there are other ways for you to be able to pursue living your life. And what that is, like I, even now, after all this time, I don't think that I could tell you specifically, like, what is that life going to look like? Um, I think that I'm on the right path. I think that I definitely, at this point, feel so much more permitted and more comfortable saying, "Yeah, I'm not gonna sign." I'm, like, not subscribing to that dog like, that way of living. I am curious about pursuing something a life that I want. Um, and again, that took a lot of work to just get to that point. So, anyways, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. Just really change starts with you. I wanted to underscore that change is excruciatingly difficult. Um, and I want to give encouragement that, change is um, any small action that you take, it counts. Just having the thought of, I want something different, that counts. And I really, when people say change, I think that there is a tendency, and I'm speaking from personal experience, that, oh my God, you have to like radically, um, like do a life makeover. Like that's not possible. Like the train has already left the station, Lindsay, and it's going like 50 miles an hour. And so I really want to give encouragement to those of you who, you know, just writing it down, thinking about it, dreaming about it, that counts as change because that small action, when it starts to stack up, let's say you're thinking about this change. You do that for a week, you do that for 2 weeks, you're like daydreaming about it. And then you start to put it down into your journal, or you're writing it down, or you're talking about it more. That's going to all add up and that's going to give you momentum. Um, at least that was, like, what the case was in my own personal experience. I feel like there's, like, research to, like, back that up. I'm gonna look into that now. Um, but I really want to underscore that change is possible and it takes a lot of, any small action counts. So don't be hard on yourself when you're like, "Oh my god, I see on social media or I see out on commercials or whatever, like people making these big dramatic like life makeovers." It can happen like that, but I bet you if you went back to the very beginning of that process that, it was something that started small. So give yourself that credit. That credit is so critically important, that precise praise. I'm a former teacher. We used to talk all the time about precise praise when you're trying to shape behavior or student behavior, to not just say good job, but good job, getting your pencil out and getting ready for the next subject area, whatever it sounds like, but that it's precise to the action. You need to do that to yourself because that's part of the process. And that's part of changing the narrative that's running in your head. That's also part of just encouraging you to pursue pursue a change. So, anyways, I'm going to be here next Friday, um, with another topic. So, if you joined, even if you joined for a minute or two, I really am so grateful to you for that. Um, we're going to wrap up here in another minute. I don't know if there's any questions. If there's questions, let me know. You can put it in the chat. Thanks so much. Thanks so much to Deborah, Sunaina. I'm sorry, I think I may have butchered that, but thanks for coming. Thanks for stopping by, Marie, Jelinas, Jeliana, um, Jamie. Come back next week, next Friday. I'll be here. I'll be here with my coffee. And I'm really excited to be on this journey with you. If you can, I want you to go. So, the entire first season to Courage Class is available right now. So, go to Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, and listen to the entire first season. I think of Courage Class as scaled mentorship, and it is specifically aimed at the Asian American community. We talk about, or I interview, who I think are trailblazers, people in our community, who are actively reclaiming, you know, health, wellness, narratives around success, and they're redefining it. And so it's really intended to encourage those of you, um, if you want that for yourself, um, it's intended to encourage you to think differently, and to challenge some of the dogma that I think has been force fed to us, for so long. So thanks so much again for joining. Come back next week, Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I will see you guys soon. Thanks so much. Bye, YouTube. Bye, TikTok.